Well, it happened again, another riot in another U.S. city. Now, Donald Trump pointing the finger at liberal policies.
Democratic crime policies, education policies, and economic policies have produced only more crime, more broken homes, and more poverty. It's time to rebuild the inner cities of America and to reject the failed leadership of a rigged political system.
So is he right or wrong? Hello, everyone. I'm Charles Payne in for Neil Cavuto, to Charlie Gasparino, Kennedy, Julie Roginski, along with Gary Kaltbaum and Scott Martin. Dagen McDowell, as you saw, doing her usual great job sub-hosting Bulls and Bears, and Adam Lashitsky still working on that huge book. But Gary, are this administration's policies hurting inner cities?
You know, Charles, every day it's an opportunity for administration to get into the inner cities and do something about it. I mean, really do something, not just flapping your gums. Over the last 8 years, crime rates up, poverty rates up, and the most important part of the equation, child poverty rates are up and the family structure is down. That means children have no chance to get ahead. The statistics are speaking loud and clear, and 8 years of wasted opportunity, my friend. Yeah, you know, to your point, poverty rates from 2009 to 13 for inner cities almost 33% versus the national average, which is just barely 14%. Scott, you're in Chicago, which is sort of the epicenter for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's where it's started, Charles, and it's frankly down to economic policy here. I mean, if you look in the inner city in Chicago, businesses are being driven out by City Hall, by regulatory policy, by tax policy of the local government. And I think that's really the root here. If you look at some of the inner city people, of course they're frustrated because they can't get jobs. They can't get ahead economically. It's because the government has kept businesses out and they're kicking them out of the cities, and therefore that's hurting the inner city residents.
Well, you know, guys, speaking of frustration, we saw that in Milwaukee, the most recent city where that played out. And it's ironic because Milwaukee has the second highest income gap between the inner city blacks and whites in that town. It's just huge, the disparity. And a lot of people are saying because these policies, it's not just the economic policies, Julian. I'll ask you this. Give you an example. Walmart, the teachers union, wants to boycott Walmart because Walmart backs charter schools, even though Walmart's out there offering these amazing discounts. So all of these embedded bureaucracies that are protecting themselves at the expense, really, of the people.
Well, listen, first of all, I'll give you a lot of inner-city mayors who support charter schools. Cory Booker, when he was mayor of Newark, which is a very struggling city right across the river, was very pro-charter schools.
But the teachers union themselves, though,
the teachers union,
they should take their competition from charter schools and revamp their game or allow them to grow.
I'm not going to defend the teachers union because I'm never a huge defender of the teachers union, but I will say this. Look, when you had the crime bill in the 90s, which in retrospect was a huge mistake, that was a liberal policy at the time, Bill Clinton signed it, you established...
Why is it a mistake?
I'll tell you why. Because you essentially established, first of all, a school-to-prison pipeline where you need criminal justice reform.
So
You're not
all that decline in crimes in black neighborhoods throughout New York City.
I don't think you can. That correlates directly to the 1994 crime bill.
Well,
I agree with that.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does. Yes.
No,
you look at the number goes down like this as the crime right after the crime bill got put into place. So it does correlate.
Charlie,
I'm not saying it's the reason why it happened, but it correlates.
Charlie, you support the fact that we have people being arrested.
It also correlates with global temperatures.
Right. But does the global temperature? Did they do global?
So essentially, you're saying that
if
if we go out there and save the polar bears, crime may go back.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't want to digress too far, guys.
Not.
You guys are actually censoring in on the data that we talk about. I already talked about the poverty rates. Jobless rates in inner cities near 16%, the national average less than 10%. We have seen things get better. We see crime rate down big time, but not in those neighborhoods.
Yeah.
We've seen some economies do better, but not in those neighborhoods, Kennedy. And it's those neighborhoods that where the Democrats have been in charge.
I mean, take a city like Detroit, which has lost its population by half. And when you lose your tax base like that, what do? They raise taxes. And it's impossible for people who are hamstrung by, you know, a lot of public service workers and a lot of taxation to ever get ahead. And, you know, they end up leaving those cities and they just fall into blight and poverty. And I think unions are one of the biggest problems in places like Chicago and Detroit. And, you know, we talk about the teachers unions, but there are also auto workers unions that have completely crippled Detroit once more competition was inserted into the mix. And on top of that, you have short-term programs that were meant to help people, like food stamps, and there are families who end up getting on them long-term for generations.
Yeah. Born cradle to grave.
Let's be really clear here. Let me just make this point. Let's be really clear. In the 1990s, we had a bipartisan effort by the Clinton administration, by Republicans, to spend money on crime, to get rid of crime, and it worked.
Where did the crime come from?
Where
did the crime come from?
What are you, all of a sudden, a psychologist, a criminal?
No.
They put people in jail.
They put people in jail because they were fighting the war on drugs, which was a multi-billion-dollar failed effort, which incarcerated generations of young men, especially black men.
Oh, yeah, it's because people that can
because of the war on drugs. Absolutely, that is one of the biggest reasons that their innocence is falling apart.
Because we do know that that spike, the crack drug epidemic, did create a huge spike, and as that has faded, so have crime. But again, we're talking about the inner city situation. And listen, I want to go to you, Scott, because you just talked about the flight out of Detroit. Many people are saying Georgia's up for grabs. The reason Georgia is up for grabs is because a third of the blacks in Chicago have left. If you've got any sort of income or any sort of job abilities, you're not going to stay in a crime-infested neighborhood. So the people stuck there, their friends who have money are leaving, businesses aren't investing, and it becomes this sort of spiral death trap.
You feel a lot of despair, and I think Kennedy brought up a good point. You get on welfare. These welfare programs that are so heavy in these inner cities are just creating control and dependence that these people have on the government to help them out, instead of having work programs and things that are tied to incentivize local businesses to come to these areas that will give these people jobs that I'm telling you want to work. And those are the things that are going to lift those people up, not these government programs.
Julie, let me ask you about that. These programs, you can say well-intended or not, just like the war on poverty began 50 years ago, not working, or maybe working the wrong way.
The majority of people on welfare are not minorities living in inner cities.
That's not the point.
Of course it's the point.
We're talking about them not working, no matter if they're majority or not. 47 million, numbers going up, and people are stuck on them longer and longer.
Okay, well, first of all,
38% rise in the food stamp program alone under this administration. And it's not to say that people who are in jeopardy
let me finish my point.
shouldn't get help. They should, and that's one of the programs that should help.
May I finish? I wonder why. We had a recession in 2008, and he came into office in 2009, and that's when people started to suffer because they lost their life savings. It's not like all of a sudden Barack Obama came into this great situation and everything was rosy and everybody got on food stamps because the economy was good.
1 second, Gary. I'm going to come to you next, Gary. 1 second.
It's not every city. Okay, this is in certain cities where this spike in crime is going on, and it's largely cities with Democratic mayors, and not only that, where there's no business, where there's no businesses, and it's also.
Well, some would say though that the businesses aren't there because of the violence. Let me go to Gary Kay, because to Charlie's point, the last Republican mayor of Milwaukee, you got to go back to 1908. Since then, they've had 3 socialist mayors. That's how crazy it's been in that city, and I think we're starting to see the result of it.
Charles, Detroit, Oakland, Memphis, St. Louis, Cleveland, Baltimore, Milwaukee, Birmingham, Newark, KC, the 10 what they say most dangerous cities because of crime stats, all have one thing in common: Democratic mayor. Simple as that. And look,
Kennedy,
the biggest, another problem. Let me add one more thing. The rhetoric, all we keep hearing is your lot in life is the way it is because businesses and the rich are holding you down and doing all bad things. We're hearing it day in and day out from Clinton, from Obama, and that tends to give them an excuse to see what we are seeing on a daily basis.
There's no doubt that accountability is not being pushed in my mind, and that's something where, hey, it's not your fault. Julie just said it's not Obama's fault, even though the recession ended officially 4 years ago and food stamps kept going up and the rest of the economy apparently got better, Kennedy.
No, the idea that you're still somehow blaming George W. Bush for sluggish GDP growth. It's like we're at 1% GDP growth for the year. At some point, that's the president's responsibility. That follows under his purview, and he's been horrible on the economy. They're right when they pointed out in the beginning that home ownership is down, wages are down, and poverty is up. All the indices that should be down.
We're going to finish this discussion here, Julie.
Because Freddie and Fannie are not giving as many mortgages thanks to what everybody here wants.
Home ownership is at a 51-year low.
It's not Fannie and Freddie.
Yeah, because nobody's giving mortgages like crack anymore.
We're finished with this segment, guys.
You can thank Dodd-Frank for that. You can thank overregulation.
Get this, Kennedy. It turns out that part of the vetting process to let these refugees in, well, reportedly is to ask refugees if they're terrorists. So the questions that are raising